In this episode, we're talking about podcast launches, and this builds off of last week's episode where I was talking about podcast trailers, because that's kind of like the precursor to the launch. If you haven't listened to that episode, I recommend you check it out. That's episode 78. It's all about mastering the art of the podcast trailer. That might help put this episode in a little bit of context. And so I'm talking about 3 launch styles. And it's important to note that there's not a right way to launch your podcast. I mean, there kind of is, but I'm going to be breaking down 3 launch styles, and that's the planned launch, the single episode launch, and the spontaneous launch. I'm going to be giving you pros and cons of each. So pros and cons for the planned launch, pros and cons for the single episode launch, pros and cons for the spontaneous launch. So without further ado, let's give it a go. So starting off with the planned launch, this is when you're putting a lot of effort in up front to get your podcast out. You have a marketing plan in place. You have multiple episodes in the can. For the last couple months, you've been super focused on recording good content, telling your friends and family. You've released that podcast trailer and you are ready to go. All your ducks are in a row. In this planned launch, it's recommended that if this is you and you have your ducks in a row, that you launch with 2 to 3 episodes on launch day. And so going back to last week's episode, prior to your launch, regardless of what kind of launch you're doing, you're going to want to launch a podcast trailer, build some buzz, do some promotion, and then a couple weeks later, actually launch with the real show. And on that launch day, when it comes to launching the actual show, it's recommended, in my opinion, that you launch with 2 to 3 episodes. And I'm going to tell you why, and why the planned launch is probably your best bet if you have the time, money, and resources to do it. And why it's great is because you get immediate listener engagement. It's kind of like Netflix. When on launch day, the show is out, or at least several episodes of the show. Like HBO, I know, does like 2 or 3. Netflix releases them all. That's a whole other story. But let's take like the HBO model. I just watched a show called Bookie with Sebastian Maniscalco, the comedian. There was 2 episodes on launch day, so I kind of got to binge those 2 episodes. So it's immediate listener engagement. So when you offer those multiple episodes at launch, it allows your listeners to dive deep into your content from the start. It also increases the likelihood of kind of them getting hooked and being like super into your show. They listen to the first episode, they're like, oh damn, there's 2 more, or there's 1 more. I'm pumped and I'm going to listen to that. It also potentially gives you a boost in podcast rankings. Now, we don't know for sure, but it's said that platforms often favor podcasts with more downloads and activity right out of the gate. And so releasing several episodes at once can lead to a higher number of individual downloads, possibly more reviews, and possibly a boost in your rankings. Also, if people like the show and they follow it, they're going to get all of those. Let's say you launched with 3, all 3 of those episodes downloaded to their phone right away. And so that's going to help downloads. And it's also said that platforms, the amount of initial subscribers or followers, the more that number gets juiced up, the better your chances are of charting. And we don't need to get into charting, or if you even need to chart, but that is a potential benefit. The multiple episode plan launch satisfies binge listeners. We're all accustomed to that, and so I think that can be a good thing. I think it also helps establish credibility. Launching with several episodes shows that you're like committed and that it's like a serious show and that you've put a lot of thought, effort, and resources into it. So the cons of the planned launch: initial increased workload. So preparing for multiple episodes on launch day requires a significant amount of work up front. You're going to have several episodes in the can. You're going to have recorded, edited, all that stuff, maybe booked guests. And so it's time consuming. On the front end, it takes a lot of effort. And it's resource intensive. I mean, time, money, all that stuff. If you have a team, if you have guests, coming up with those ideas for all that content from the get-go. Speaking of content, it could be wasted content because for some reason, if your podcast doesn't resonate with your audience, you might have ended up wasting time and resources in a place that like wasn't effective, or like maybe you blew your load up front and now you're kind of out of content ideas, or you're just like totally overwhelmed and you finally launched and now you've run out of steam to like run the rest of the race. Something to think about. And that's kind of this last con, which is like the pressure to maintain that momentum. There can be pressure to launch episodes with the same amount of quality or the same amount of informative information. And so burnout is a real possibility there. And so to wrap up the planned launch, a well-planned launch contains multiple episodes. And the goal with this style of launch is this is what you're after, is to create a strong initial impact. And it kind of caters to our culture of like binge listening. But it's a lot of work, a lot of planning and resources. And if you have that, awesome. I love the idea of the planned launch. I kind of did that, but not completely. It was a little willy-nilly, although I did have a plan. I was a little kind of like, I've recorded all these episodes, let's just get this out there. I probably recorded like 6 episodes or something before I launched. It gave me an initial buffer, but now I'm a little behind. Anyway, so it's important to weigh your situation, weigh the goal of your podcast, weigh how much time you want to put into this. Is it a hobby? Is it just for fun? Is it part of your business in which you probably want to go this route? But I'm speaking to a wide variety of podcasters, so keep that in mind. You've got to go with what you know and what you're capable of. Okay, and so moving on to the single episode launch. And so this is like, you launch with 1 episode on launch day. And by launching with a single episode, you can concentrate your efforts on making that episode awesome. Create a killer episode, it's well thought out, it's well planned, you put a lot of effort into it, and rather than doing that across 3 episodes, you are maybe dialed back a bit and you're like, okay, this podcasting thing is new to me and I don't fully know what I'm doing and I'm a little overwhelmed, so I'm just going to launch with 1 episode. And it's going to be a good episode, don't get me wrong, but I'm just going to put my efforts there. And launching with just 1 episode, it's also okay. There's nothing wrong with that. You're going to get immediate feedback also, because by releasing just 1 episode, you can kind of gauge feedback from people. First of all, fuck, I hope that wasn't rubbing that the whole time. Sorry, my headphones were just like rubbing. I'm on a lav mic today, guys. I'm in a different location with a different setup. Forgot a piece of equipment for my regular mic, or a microphone, a handheld, so I'm on this lav. So by launching with a single episode, again, you're going to get that feedback for that first episode, and then so maybe for episodes 2, 3, 4, and onward, you can use some of that feedback and be like, okay, the people liked this, they didn't like that, and I'm going to kind of take some of that to heart and work on my show for the next episode. Man, it's also just less pressure. The last thing you want when launching a podcast is more pressure to do more things, and so I think simplifying the process is just going to help, because there's a lot, and especially if this is your first podcast, there's so much you don't know, so much you think you know, and so much confusion and questions. And I think any pressure you can take off yourself when you're doing something new is key. And then with marketing, this is another pro. Pro number 3 or 4, wherever we're at. Marketing, 1 episode is probably a little easier, because if you do that planned launch with 3 episodes out of the gate, that's a lot of stuff that you have to market. In podcasting, we typically market like each individual episode. So with this, you're just focused on 1. Whether you're creating snippets or social media graphics, whatever you're doing, it's just 1 episode. Maybe you're blasting your email list. If this is for like a business, you only have to talk about 1 episode. You can focus your messaging on that. So what are the cons of the single episode launch? Well, you kind of do have the risk of losing momentum. If your listeners do love your first episode, they might be looking for more, because as I mentioned earlier, we're in that binge culture. They're like, damn, this person only put out 1 episode? Like, yes, they'll probably still listen to the next one, but they're like, now I have to wait a week or 2 weeks or whatever it is. So it can lead to a little bit of loss of momentum. Another con is the algorithmic disadvantages. So we mentioned that it's said that podcast listening apps favor a multi-episode launch, because that boosts the amount of followers you're getting. And supposedly those platforms take into account how fast you're getting followers and downloads, and that helps you maybe show up on one of the home pages for like the niche that you're in. And so if you only have one episode, it's unlikely that that's going to happen, and probably honestly it's unlikely even if you launch with multiple episodes, because podcasting is a competitive game, and nowadays it's getting harder and harder to get those listeners. Reduced SEO opportunities. So multiple episodes provides more content for search engines to crawl. That obviously provides more opportunity for people to see your show. So if you only have one episode out, it kind of limits some of that. But all in all, launching with one episode can be effective. So I'm not hating on this. If this is the way you got to go, then this is what you do. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not about where you start, although you do want to start strong. You want to build momentum and keep getting stronger week after week, month after month. So weigh these factors against your specific goals and resources when deciding whether the single episode launch is right for you. All right, baby. Number 3, the spontaneous launch. So totally fine with this too. Like, if this is the way you got to go because this podcast thing is overwhelming and confusing, and you're just like, shit, I finally got around to editing this and I messed up the editing multiple times. There's multiple iterations of this episode, but I finally got it and I'm ready. And so I'm just going to hit publish and get it out to the world. I kind of like that. I have a little bit of that in me. I just like to do things. I think planning sometimes just gets me caught in like a spiral of thoughts and what ifs, and if I just do, then sometimes it ends up being better. Some of the pros of the spontaneous launch: overcoming procrastination. Maybe you are caught in that cycle of like, oh, I'll do it later, or I'm confused, so I'm gonna wait. I think for many creators, this is a big hurdle, and simply just getting started bypasses all that overthinking, and you turn things into action. Authenticity and excitement. Dude, there's raw energy and enthusiasm about something is the best. I mean, if you just got to get that out there and you want to get it out there, and maybe you're not the best at marketing or social, but you're pumped and stoked about your podcast, just release the damn show. Following this route, you're also learning by doing. Jumping in allows you to learn with like hands-on experience. Instead of listening to me or any other quote-unquote guru or expert, you just do the fucking thing. And that's probably, with podcasting or anything else in life, one of the best ways to learn, in my opinion. And this next pro, without a rigid plan, you've got adaptable content. You have the flexibility to start, even at the beginning, even if it's just like 2 or 3 episodes in, to adapt maybe the format of your show, or maybe you want to follow a trend. Maybe there's something buzzing and you want, a couple episodes in, you want to like ride that coattail. Whatever it is, you can evolve because you haven't had such a rigid plan from the get-go. And lastly, immediate gratification. When you accomplish something, it just gets you excited to do more. So even if it's not perfect, you did it, and I think that continues to build. So some of the cons of the spontaneous launch: lack of preparation. Without adequate preparation, you might have like technical issues, you might have audio issues, in marketing, maybe you're all over the place. If you are deciding to post on social media, there's not like a cohesive look or feel. So that could be a negative. Probably is a negative. Challenges in building an audience. Without a proper launch strategy, it's going to be harder to attract and retain listeners. Like just sure, you probably told your friends, or maybe you didn't, that you're about to launch because you're nervous or whatever, and then on launch day, you try to start messaging everybody and try to build buzz, but maybe it's too late by then. So there are some opportunities that you could miss out on. Inconsistent branding, like I mentioned, with the socials, with the way you talk about your show. That all just makes it harder to build an audience because you don't know kind of what you're doing and how to talk about what you're doing. And then lastly, the final con here for the spontaneous launch is sustainability issues. Without a plan and maintaining a schedule, it can be challenging. And inconsistency with podcasting is a real problem because avid, like real diehard podcast fans, they love the consistency. week to week or every other week. I know all the days of the week when the shows come out that I listen to, and I get pumped for that. I'm like, all right, it's Wednesday. I'm going to listen to Water Cooler. It's a part of my life. It's part of my day. It's a part of my like spiritual growth or like just feels good. And so without that plan up front, your fans might miss out on some of this stuff, and you might lose momentum and lose steam because people aren't feeling it, because you didn't maybe do what you were supposed to do. But hey, if you got your show out, you got it out, and props to you. So the spontaneous launch can be liberating, but there's definitely some risks involved. So keep that in mind. So there you have it, people. 3 different ways to do a podcast launch: the planned launch, the spontaneous launch, and the single episode launch. And while I say that there's no wrong way, you probably do want to have somewhat of a plan. You can even do a spontaneous launch, but still have a little bit of a plan, a roadmap. You got to do what feels right for you. And I realize the things that factor into it are, again, like, is this just for fun? Is it a hobby? Is it for your business with plans to monetize? If that's the case, then yeah, you probably want to have a real solid plan in place. If it's just for fun, then hey, drop that episode when you can. Try to get some momentum, and as you learn more and you're feeling good, then you can start to get more on a schedule. It's like anything. But hey, even if you are a planner, throw a little bit of spontaneity in there. I think overthinking creates a lack of underdoing, if that's a real term or a real word right there. But that's it for the podcast launch, guys. And if you have questions about this, if you're confused or you're trying to find your place on where you fit in with this, based on what you want to do, or you have questions, head on over to thepodcasthaven.com, fill out that contact form. I'm Eric, the founder of the Podcast Haven, which is the podcast production company that produces this show Clipped. I'm happy to talk about your launch and give you some advice. I'll do it on the house. I want to connect with you guys. I want to help you. I've been doing this for a while, and so I have a pretty good idea of what would work for your specific situation. All right, guys, enjoy, and I will talk to you soon. Keep listening, keep engaging, and keep creating. I'm out.